the majority of disowned children were still in the hands of large care homes. Many of the homes were also seeking new ways to cope with the surge in numbers.
Yes, they're feeling happy, their hopes are high, their future bright.
Shipping children to Britain's former colonies, particularly Australia and Canada, was one way for the churches and charities to remove some of the surplus youngsters.
One of the things I do remember is somebody coming into the classroom one day and saying, "Who wants to go to Australia?" Well, we all hated where we were, so we all put our hands up, I think.
At the Overseas League HQ, a number of young emigrants to Australia were recently entertained before their departure.
This migration of children in care began in the 19th century, but it was still going on in the 1960s. It was felt that these children were tainted, their prospects poor.
We have the attitude from the British end of almost a fear of these children from the wrong side of the tracks, setting down a path that will lead to crime and social problems, and they need to be redeemed from that in some way. And they were a problem for us here in the UK because they would be the kinds of children who would create social problems given their position in society.
Patrick McGowan had been living in a Catholic orphanage in Belfast for 8 years. An official came to his classroom with an offer that was pure deception.
We were told you'll be riding to school on a horse and you'll be picking bananas off the trees on the way to school and all that sort of stuff. Anybody would have gone for that, wouldn't they? Even people with parents would have jumped at that one.
White sands and blue water. When the kiddies get to the beaches, they become real diggers.
But the reality of life in Australia proved very different. When the boys got off the boat in Fremantle, they were swiftly moved to Bindoon, a Catholic home, where the 11-year-old Patrick was given hard manual labour along with the other children.
Bindoon was pretty tough. When I got to Bindoon, I got a khaki shirt, a khaki pair of pants, and that was it. No underwear, bare feet. For the first couple of years I was at Bindoon, we worked and worked and worked on the buildings, but there wasn't any education, and that was the big one. One of the mottos of Bindoon was, if you could work with your hands, you don't need your brains.
Over the years, 150,000 children were transported to Britain's former colonies. Many of them faced harsh lives at best, and often abuse. But for the councils and charities mainly responsible for childcare, it was an ideal solution.
Across the continent in Perth, Western Australia, child migrants in the Fairbridge Farm School started their celebrations.
Voluntary societies such as Barnardo's thought they were doing work not only for child rescue, but also something that was to the benefit of the empire. So with that extra political spin, they were able to convince governments that this was something that the British state should finance.
And they did. For 5 decades, Britain sponsored the migration of children to the former colonies, paying as much as 3/4 of the costs. The practice came to an end in 1970, but the advantages throughout were conspicuous. The theory was to populate empty nations with good white stock.
I think they saw an opportunity to get rid of all these kids from England, and they sent them to other colonies where they could populate and breed and work.
Far from the fun and fresh air they had been promised, many of these children had nothing to look forward to but brutality. Worst of all, attempts to trace their families were often met with lies.
My records are just nothing. There's nothing there, you know. Medical history, you name it, you know. I can't find anything about myself. I don't think I'll ever find out who my forebears are, you know. In my darkest moments, I think, why the secrecy? I mean, I'm a human being. I'm worth something. I need to be identified. I need to identify where I come from.